better mechanism anywhere in the world, nothing more precise than these cathedrals and basilicas for measuring the perceived motion of the sun. And they were constructed so that you could observe the sun's apparent movement on the floor using various shadows and the like. Well, this is extremely significant because, in fact, modern astronomers were able to use these precise instruments in order to verify important theories about planetary orbits. For example, it was a Catholic astronomer named Giovanni Cassini who used the Cathedral of San Petronio in Bologna, in the heart of the Papal States, where the Pope lives, the Pope who's supposedly discouraging the sciences. It was in that basilica that this Catholic astronomer Cassini used the mechanism of this basilica to in fact verify Johannes Kepler's theories of planetary motion. That was done in the Papal States in a Catholic basilica by a Catholic astronomer. And Kepler himself, by the way, who was not a Catholic, nevertheless consistently observed that his favorite scientific correspondents were Jesuits, were Catholic priests, because they were so knowledgeable. They understood what he was talking about, unlike most of the world. Again, these are forgotten chapters, but they don't need to be. And they're starting to be brought out little by little. Isn't it interesting that it was a professor at UC Berkeley? University of California at Berkeley is not exactly known as being a big cheerleading institution for the Catholic Church. We'll put it that way. But Professor Heilbronn there wrote a book, about 5-6 years ago, called The Sun in the Church. And he told the story, this forgotten story, about the use of cathedrals and basilicas in the advancement of our knowledge of astronomy. In fact, Heilbronn went and said that there is no institution anywhere on earth that had done more for the advancement of astronomy or contributed more resources to this study than the Catholic Church. Now, in large part, the Catholic Church did that because we wanted to be able to predict equinoxes, for instance, so that we could establish when Easter should be celebrated and establish it far enough in advance that we could enjoy a 40-day period of penance in advance, namely Lent. But nevertheless, once they're built, scientists begin to use them, Catholic scientists, and advances science. A totally forgotten chapter, finally being brought forth by a figure, as far as I know, isn't Catholic at all, but just is interested to recover important work and discoveries that, for one reason or another, we've forgotten about. Now, the objection in the back of people's minds, and it's an understandable one at this point, is, what about Galileo? Because you can talk all you want about all the wonderful things the Church did for science in general, and astronomy in particular, but what about Galileo? I mean, wasn't he tortured, and didn't they try to kill him or something because he disagreed with the Church? But that is part of a mythology that, let's say, is extremely difficult to dislodge from people's minds. Now, I think it is safe to say that the Galileo episode is not exactly the Church's shining moment, and it should be acknowledged that there is reason for regret about it, to say the least. In fact, in my 7 years as a university professor in New York, I would say that the one episode that did more than everything else put together to discredit the Catholic Church in the minds of my students was the perceived history of the Galileo episode. There's no question about it. So the consequences of it were just disastrous. At the same time, I think it is important to revisit this episode for two reasons. First, so that it won't seem as if we're just trying to duck it, or that I'm just trying to find the good news and not dwell on the not-so-good. But secondly, because I think the standard telling of the Galileo story is incomplete, or is unfair, or is one-sided. Yes, it's, as I say, it's nothing to be particularly proud of, but at the same time, there are facts, I think, that deserve mention. And before getting into the details of Galileo, we'll just simply say this. Galileo was a genius and had much of importance to say, but his central thesis, that in fact the Earth orbits the Sun rather than the other way around, could not be established in his day to the satisfaction of all thinking people. I think the assumption is that if you thought that the Sun went around the Earth in the 1600s, you must be some kind of a dolt. You know, you need to be smacked in the face or something. What's the matter with you? Don't you study science? But in fact, those who believe that the sun went around the earth in the 17th century, in some ways, still had the better of the argument. They had important arguments to advance against Galileo that he himself could not answer. In fact, if you raised them to Galileo, he'd pretty much have to say, hey, look over there, and then run away, because he's got no answer for them. So next time, we're going to take our time and go through this Galileo case step by step, see what really did happen to him, what didn't happen to him, and we'll look at the arguments that were used. And I'm going to give a detailed explanation of the arguments that people who disagreed with Galileo made, to show you they weren't stupid, they weren't just ignorant religious people. They were making arguments that had gone unanswered since the days of Aristotle. And they were explaining that if you're going to say that our interpretation of the Bible up to now, which some people thought said that the sun was going around the earth, you're going to tell us that's wrong, the science better be absolutely ironclad, true, and proved for sure. But it wasn't. And Galileo did not get the better of the argument. So that's where we're going to pick up next time. Let's look at Galileo and see what really happened next time on the Catholic Church, Builder of Civilization. Thanks.